Today's artist talk is all about pictures versus words, especially the words that we use as titles for our photographs. As you know, titles can be controversial in photographic circles, and that was why we put this month's exhibition together. We wanted to encourage discussion about titles and their influence on how we view images. Turning the question around for a moment to the people who are participating in the exhibition, why did you put photographs into it? Many people I've talked to say that they just don't like titles, so this exhibition is perfect for them. Other people perhaps were struggling to find titles for their images, and they were hoping to get some clever title ideas from other people. And a few people have been writing suggested titles in the booklet in the gallery. Big question is how many people already had titles for their pictures, but they took them away for this exhibition. And I have to confess, I am one of those people. I'm going to begin today's artist talk with some background to explain why I am the person doing the artist talk. Then we're going to explore the pictures versus words debate with 5 arguments for and 5 arguments against titles. And then we're going to finish by briefly discussing how to create appropriate titles. And I'm going to use some of our untitled exhibition pictures for illustration, along with others that I've picked up along the way. The big question with titles is who struggles to find titles for their image? Are you annoyed that you have to do it? Well, it's not surprising. We're visual artists. We're more comfortable with visual rather than verbal expression. So the typical scenario is that you slap a title on at the last minute. If you have a midnight deadline to submit an image, it's 11:55 before you sit down to try and do that. And the typical title that people assign to a work in these circumstances is either the subject matter, just stating what people are looking at in the image anyway, or the location of the image. And if they're forced to come up with a longer caption for an image, most commonly photographers will include the camera settings or the techniques used, which is, of course, of absolutely no interest to anybody except other photographers, and even them, maybe not so much. The big question does anybody else enjoy coming up with titles? Well, if you do, you must be a kindred spirit. And I'm going to tell my story briefly so you can see why I volunteered to do this talk. I started out not as a photographer, but as a writer. It was about 25, 30 years ago, and I was stranded for a time in Toronto. And I'm not a city girl. I grew up in the Maritimes and I love the wild outdoors. So living in Toronto was not really for me. So I escaped north at every opportunity to places like Georgian Bay and Lake Superior. And I started writing about my travel for outdoor and nature magazines and finally got a contract to write a couple of paddling and hiking guidebooks. And I needed pictures for illustration, and so I bought a camera. Over the next decade, my focus for photography shifted. It became more than mere illustration. First, photography became an art, and then a full-time business, selling prints and teaching. Words are still very important in my work, but now they're almost always connected with pictures. Titles for my prints, artist statements, teaching materials, and articles and books about photography, including, by the way, my Pictures versus Words book. Which brings us back to the title of this artist talk and the long-standing debate about pictures and words and the value or not of titles. And there are great arguments on both sides. And I'm going to begin with 5 arguments against words and titles. Argument number 1. Words and clever titles cannot rescue a bad photograph, and that is one of the most common reasons for using words to explain or to justify a bad picture. This photograph, for instance, it's cluttered, it's unfocused, the bird is poorly positioned, sticks in front of it. The only good thing about the photograph is that it is of interesting subject matter. This is a chickadee, but it's not your normal chickadee. It's not even an albino chickadee. It is quite a rare genetic variation called a leucistic chickadee. But knowing this still doesn't make the photograph any better as a photograph. So a bad photograph cannot be rescued with words. The second argument has to do with science. Science demonstrates the supremacy of pictures over text. In the field of archaeology, for instance, we have the oldest known picture on the left-hand side, which was discovered just a couple of years ago in Indonesia, and it's more than 50,000 years old. Whereas the oldest known text, written text that is, on the right-hand side comes from Mesopotamia only 3,500 years ago. So human beings have more than 44,000 more years communicating with pictures than they do with written text. Oral spoken language, of course, has been used for much longer. They figure about 2.5 million years. But written text, only 3,500 years. In the field of neurology, studies of the human brain have shown that more than 50% of all sensory receptors and nerve tissue is dedicated to visual perception. So with visual perception, we have much greater speed and volume and complexity of sense, of visual sense. And it gives us much greater recall and emotional impact. Hence the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Advertisers, of course, capitalize on this. People purchase 94% more readily using pictures than with text alone. So if you want to sell a Corvette, for instance, naturally you pair the picture of a car with a sexy girl. This, of course, is assuming that your target market is the young, straight male, or perhaps the gay female. Argument number 3. Visual communication is universal, unlike verbal communication that is constrained by language. So here's a line of text in 3 different languages: Greek, Cantonese, and Punjabi. If you can speak one of those 3 languages, then you understand the text. But if you don't, you're left mystified. Well, here it is in English. Donald Trump is crazy, but these pictures convey the Trump is crazy message no matter which language you speak. As long as you know who Trump is, you will get the message. On a less crazy note, here we have one of the pictures from our exhibition. Averd's picture speaks for itself. It doesn't need a title or words to explain it. We feel the wonder, the engagement with the natural world. And because he's cleverly presented the children as virtual silhouettes, they could be any children. They could be our children, or they could be ourselves as children. It maybe triggers memories of your own childhood visits to a place like the Halifax Natural History Museum, or some other similar museum wherever you grew up. Moving on to the next argument, number 4, and perhaps one of the most compelling for us as photographic artists. Words and pictures are simply different ways of communicating. the verbal medium versus the visual medium, and each comes with its own set of tools. A writer starts with an idea or an argument or a story, and the author will select and arrange words using the tools of the trade, which for the writer are vocabulary, grammar, and punctuation. And he will create, or she, create fiction, nonfiction perhaps, drama, or poetry. Similarly, the photographer is inspired by the visual environment and his or her response to it, and they'll select and arrange visual elements using the tools of our trade: composition, camera technique, and computer processing. And we create descriptive images or expressive images or aesthetic, abstract styles of images. Competent use of the tools of their respective mediums results in effective communication that is either informative or evocative, or perhaps both. So the bottom line is that the competent author communicates effectively with words. They don't need pictures. And a competent photographer shouldn't need words. They should be able to inform or evoke ideas and emotions using simply the visual elements and camera and computer skills. Ansel Adams eloquently summarized this argument. A true photograph doesn't need words, and it can say much more than words. It speaks for itself and stands on its own. You can feel the awe of this impressive Yosemite landscape without a title. But before you jump to conclusions, this photograph is not by Ansel Adams. It's one of our exhibition pictures, and it was made by Steve Phillips. You can also feel the character of this man. You don't need to read his biography, although it is in fact a very interesting biography. The facial expression, the edgy visual design, and the dark processing make this image very compelling and give you a real taste of what this man is like. And this, of course, is a photograph made by Ned Pratt of his father, Christopher Pratt, the Newfoundland painter. And the final argument against words: once an image is out there, the maker's intent becomes irrelevant. The image's interpretation should be entirely up to the viewer. The maker has the responsibility to create the best possible image, but no right to dictate the image's meaning to viewers. The viewer has the right and the responsibility to create their own interpretation. So in this case, titles may be seen as distracting or misleading or perhaps even coercive. I'm going to show you a few examples here. Here we have a disturbing image by Elliot Erwitt. No title, just a location and a date. And it challenges us to wonder, to tell stories. And those stories will be very different depending on who we are and our cultural experiences. Here's another picture from our exhibition by Kathleen. Her untitled picture with garden gnomes and a lizard sparks curiosity, and it engages us precisely because we don't know what exactly we're supposed to be looking at. Is it a photograph of the lizard and the gnomes just happened to be there? Or was she photographing gnomes and a lizard happened to wander into the frame? Or is it in fact a plastic lizard and she posed it there on the tree trunk amongst the gnomes to create some kind of a story with the three visual elements? And how does that droopy vine fit in, the one that's blocking the one of the gnome's faces? So there are a lot of questions in this image, and the questions engage us and invite us to spend longer with the image. Here we have another untitled picture, this one by Roxanne, a complex assembly of images superimposed onto a map outline. And it engages us because we want to explore and try to figure it out. Is this a commentary, perhaps, about rising sea levels? Is it a commentary about feeling personally overwhelmed and lost? Is it a commentary about a lone individual against the world, pushing back the tides on both sides? Is it a commentary about the impermanence of our world, of our lives? These are questions that she invites us to consider when we're looking at her photograph. It's especially true for more abstract photographs, and these two from our exhibition are prime examples. We know what they are, but they border on the abstract. So Alan's angular shadows with the light on the tiles, you wonder, what am I looking at? What are those shadows, and where am I? And gives you food for thought. Similarly, Craig's tiny leaves floating dreamily over the reflected branches. And he's created 4 images in a sequence here. So should we be interpreting this picture alone in isolation, or as part of his 4-image series? Both these images are a bit mysterious. They make us wonder and use our imaginations. And there are multiple interpretations of them based on the viewer's background and mood. And for completely abstract photographs like this one from Heather, our inevitable first response is to scratch our heads and wonder, what am I looking at? And then, if we have the patience for it, we go with the abstract flow and create our own interpretations. So a title might actually cramp our imaginative musings. So here is a recap of the arguments against words. I'll just let you read for a moment while I have a sip of my tea. So, words can't rescue a bad photograph. Science shows that humans are more responsive to pictures than they are to words. Words are constrained by language. Competently crafted pictures shouldn't need words. And once a picture is out there, its interpretation is up to the viewer. This quote by Elliot Erwitt sums up the entire argument against words very well. And I agree with all of these arguments. And yet, there is another side to the debate. So I want to give you now 5 strong arguments showing why pictures and words can actually make excellent partners. And just a note that I'm mostly using my own photographs for illustration here because I know the thought process behind them, whereas with the other exhibition pictures, I have basically no idea what was behind them, and I don't want to speak for the authors of them. So argument number 1 is rather mundane and logistical, but nonetheless important. Titles serve as labels that can be used for image identification, a handy verbal reference that's helpful when discussing or exhibiting or trying to sell images. If you don't have some sort of title, you can wind up with potential confusion. It's very cumbersome to have to describe the image every time. And the alternative, which is to number the image, makes it very much harder to discuss because we just don't think. We don't think or remember numbers in the same way that we do words. The best illustration, perhaps, for this was the logistics of hanging this exhibition. Alan and Ron, between them, the exhibition print wranglers and organizers, had diagrams and complicated notes to keep the installation organized, because how else would we know which wall cards, which prices belong to which images, and how do we record the sales in the sales book? The title becomes just a handy way of referencing each of these pictures. Moving on to less pedestrian arguments in favor of words and titles. Words can clarify image content and help to guide viewer interpretation. And this can be very useful when either the maker and the viewer come from different backgrounds. They come from different cultures, perhaps. They live in different geographies. They have different personal experiences. It can also be helpful when image content appears controversial or ambiguous. The viewer wants to understand the picture, but isn't able to without a bit of help. And that help can be, at a minimum, a short title, a couple of words, or it could be a caption or a longer story to give a fuller explanation. So here's an example that illustrates when the maker and the viewer come from different backgrounds and the content might be controversial. So without any words or titles, you have to figure this image out for yourself. And you may feel a little bit conflicted by it. If I were to tell you that the image was made by Greenpeace, it would shape your interpretation probably towards the negative. You would think of these as savages butchering the poor whale, if I were to tell you it was a Greenpeace photograph. But it is not a photograph by Greenpeace. This, in fact, is a photograph by somebody called Glenn Williams, who was working for an Inuit foundation that promotes the local economy with a sustainable community whale harvest. And if I tell you that, which is in fact the truth, it shapes your interpretation likely towards the positive. It's the same picture. The picture hasn't changed. It's just the text that goes with it that has helped to shape your interpretation. So words can help to clarify an image when the maker and viewer have different backgrounds or the image content is potentially controversial. Here is an example of an image that is ambiguous. And ambiguity is always especially true of abstract images. Without a title, we can only guess what this image is of and about. But with a title, Doug could choose to clarify and guide how we interpret and view his image. And there are 4 options with respect to titling abstract images like this one. We can identify the image using a title. We can tell the viewer what it is they're looking at. Now, I don't actually know, I'm just guessing here that these are blue glass bottles, but let's just suppose for the sake of argument that they are. So Doug could give the title glass bottles and tell us what it is we're looking at. Or he could indicate to us that this image is intended as an abstract. Here we have a title that guides viewers to look not at the content, the subject matter, the glass bottles, but rather to look at the geometry and to look at the color of the content here. So by giving it a title, Geometry in Blue, Doug would be suggesting to us that we look at it aesthetically rather than looking at the subject matter. The third possibility is a kind of combination. It suggests the identity of the subject matter, but it encourages an imaginative interpretation. So we have blue glasses, which is what we're looking at, but we've also got a blue glasses view. and a blue glasses view is a distorted or pessimistic view based on personal prejudice. So it suggests to us that we should look at this picture as more than just its subject matter. And the fourth possibility for a title is untitled. And that says one of two things to a viewer. Either the photographer doesn't like or is too lazy to come up with a title, or it's a signal to the viewer that the photographer wants him to interpret the picture for themselves. Make no mistake, untitled is a title. The only way to truly untitle an image is to put it on a blank wall with no wall card and no explanation. So those are Doug's four options, and whichever one he chooses would be our starting point for looking at this image. So argument number 2 showed how words can clarify image content. Argument number 3 expands on this theme. Words provide supplementary information that can enrich a viewer's experience of the image. And it can do this by giving us a bit of backstory, that is more information about the image content or about the maker's intention. It could do this by giving us an allusion to another artwork, which can sometimes create a deeper connection and meaning. Or it could be wordplay, a humorous or ironic twist on the interpretation. So here are two examples. This is an example of killing two birds with one stone here, using allusion and backstory. So the image by itself is a dreamy picture of a boardwalk through a line of birch trees. And it comes from the Sackville Waterfowl Park in New Brunswick, right across from Mount Allison University. The backstory here is that I was walking along this boardwalk in early December in freezing drizzle, and I was thinking about all these kids graduating soon from Mount Allison University and making all these big life choices about careers, perhaps partners. And here I was, decades later, walking along wondering, what if? What if I'd done something different when I went to university? Where would I be now? And that led me to think about Robert Frost and the title that became the title of this picture, The Road Not Taken. So this becomes an allusion to the poem by Robert Frost, which was all about the what ifs in life. So the title is an implied reference and it taps into the poem's meaning. Now, of course, this requires that the viewer knows the reference. It's kind of irrelevant if they've never heard of Robert Frost and The Road Not Taken. So if they have, at least in this case, the case of this picture, backstory and allusion can enrich the viewer's experience of this image. And this is an example of enrichment with wordplay. If you see the image alone, untitled, you can make up your own story. But let's add my title, Housing Insecurity. It has many connotations, two of which are suggested by this image. One is a physically unstable building. Well, here we have one, just about to teeter off the post. The second is a connotation of housing insecurity is living in socially precarious circumstances. So the title describes the image, but also evokes a serious social subject using wordplay, the two meanings, two of many potential meanings of housing insecurity. The next argument in favor of words and titles is that you can use the two media together for stronger communication than it's possible to give with either medium alone. Words take time to read and to think about. So if we put words with an image, the viewer is inclined to spend longer with the image and has as a result, a more immersive experience and a more enduring impression. So in this case, we have a picture, we have a wall label, which is obviously more than a title. It includes quite a bit of detail underneath. And we also have an audio-visual guide to the artwork. So by the time these two viewers come away from this image, they're going to have spent quite a bit of time with it and perhaps have a deeper appreciation than if they just simply walked up to it in the gallery and wondered, what on earth are all these squiggles? So here's an example from one of my pictures in the Untitled exhibition. These anthropomorphic birds and the squiggly snapped wire are clearly intended to reference human relationships. And you can insert your own relationship here, whatever it happens to be. Well, there's an interesting story about this picture because I had it on the gallery wall and I was staffing the gallery a week ago, which just happened to be Mother's Day. And a family walked in. They'd never been in the gallery before. They didn't know it was here. And it was a mother and a father and a young teenage son. And I told them about the gallery, explained who we were, and I explained something about the Untitled exhibition, the rationale for it. And they were looking at all the photographs and they really liked what they were seeing and they thought the Untitled theme was really interesting. And then they came across my picture of the crows. And the mother, in this case, really liked the picture. But it was when I told them the story about the picture that her eyes really lit up. Because these were crows. I feed crows around my house, and so they're always here. And in fact, while I've been doing this talk, because I'm doing it from my home today, you've probably heard birds in the background, and that's the crow having a chit chat with my cat. So I apologize for the background noise. Anyway, this pair of crows is actually a parent, I don't know whether mother or father, with a newly fledged chick. And the chick was driving this poor adult crazy with all the squawking looking for food. And so this really obviously resonated with the family, with the mother. And so she said, "Oh, it's Mother's Day. I have to have this photograph." And so her husband and their son bought the photograph for her, and the son put the red dot on the wall card. And now, of course, I have to say it's also a very small print and relatively inexpensive, so that may have influenced her decision. But really, she loved the picture. But what it was she really loved was the story that I told her about the frazzled parent and the persistent child. And this has been my experience now in 10, 15 years of making my living full time selling prints is people will like the picture. They will respond positively to a picture. But generally what sells the picture is the story behind it. So far, we have talked about how titles help viewers by clarifying visual content, by enriching communication. The final argument today shows how titles can help us as makers. Creating a title forces us to understand our own image and make choices that help us communicate better with it. Titles, forcing us to come up with titles, makes us to consider several questions. What inspired me to make the picture? What does it mean to me? What is the content, the physical content? What's my relationship with it? And what do I want to say with this picture? And that leads to the fourth thing. Have I constructed the image so that I'm saying it the best way that I can, so that the viewer has the best chance of getting what I'm trying to say? So the search for a title can actually make us rethink the image, perhaps go back and edit it, or even to discard the image. Here's an example, again, from the exhibition here. This is another of my pictures. This was the first rendition of this picture after the initial processing. And I liked it, but I felt a bit conflicted about the result. And I was struggling to think of a suitable title. I came up with Winter Field, and it's just a simple descriptive title. It's the classic thing when you can't think of a title, you just say what the subject matter is. It's winter and it's a field. So there we are, Winter Field. But I didn't think this was just a simple descriptive image. What I felt in making this image was much more intense and meaningful. So after pondering for a while, I returned to the image to fine tune it. And I created the image that you see on the gallery wall now, which is much closer to what I really wanted to say. But the title Winter Field isn't really appropriate anymore. So I changed the title to reinforce the edgy feeling that I had. But then, of course, I had to remove the title for this untitled exhibition. So this is just to illustrate that the process of titling itself can lead to a greater understanding of our own images. This argument is summed up beautifully in this wonderful quote by Albert Einstein. If you can't explain it simply, that is in a 1 to 3 or 4 word title, then you don't understand it well enough yourself. So to recap the arguments in favor of words, again, I'll let you read for a moment. So it's useful for image identification when we want to discuss or exhibit or sell an image. Titles are useful to clarify content, aid interpretation, enrich a viewer's experience. If we use pictures and words together, we often end up with a stronger communication. And coming up with a title can lead to refining the maker's vision for their own images. The bottom line is a picture has to be strong on its own. There's no point. A garbage picture is not going to be saved by words. It has to have interesting content, and it has to be well constructed. Visual design has to be good. But it can be more interesting and even more effective when it's thoughtfully combined with words, when it's thoughtfully given a title. So I'm going to finish today by giving us some brief guidelines for how to create titles for your images. All images fit somewhere along what I call an image style continuum, all the way from the far left-hand side where we have what I'm calling descriptive images. These are images that show something. You know, I've hiked here and I've seen this, and look at the beautiful view, something like that. This is also true of, say, photojournalism pictures or nature images that are used for guides to show you what a bird, for instance, will look like. Then at the far right-hand side, we have what I'm calling aesthetic images. These are not about the physical content at all, but rather about aesthetic elements of light and color and shape. And this is most common with completely abstract pictures, but it can also apply to some of the more fine art work that you just know is not about the subject matter, a kettle or a pair of glasses or an egg. It's really about the shape and color and texture and light. In between, we have the vast majority of the pictures that we tend to make. And these are personal responses to subject matter. It's what the subject matter means to us rather than look at this thing. So the first step in coming up with a title is to identify the image style of our image. And that will lead to the most appropriate title for that image. So for a descriptive image, we need a factual, descriptive style of title. For an aesthetic image, as discussed earlier, we have a range of choices. We can either identify the subject matter, or we can tell the viewer by introducing some art terminology, for instance, that we want them to look at it as an aesthetic image. Or we can force the viewer to interpret the image for themselves by giving it the title untitled. In between, we have all those expressive images where the titles may want to suggest an emotion or an idea, may give a clue to a story that we want to tell. It might want to provoke us or surprise us, or it might want to help us as a viewer to understand the image. And these are much more complicated titles. They take a lot more thought than the factual title, for sure. Once we know an image style and the most appropriate kind of title for it, we still have to figure out the specific words that are the best fit. So how do we do this? Now, I'm not going to go through all this in huge detail. I'll let you read for a moment. So just to summarize, we identify the image content and style and meaning. And then we, as we're doing the first three things, we jot down words: the what, the who, the where, the when, the why, and the what else. In Minor White, the words of Minor White, that we should be showing not just what there is, but what else there is in our images. And in doing this, we build a collection of words, and then we use reference material, dictionaries and synonyms, thesauruses, quotes, idioms, all that sort of thing. And we build a collection of words. And then we play with combinations. And this is where you just have to trust your instincts and wait for an aha moment that gives you that perfect title. And I tell you, it can take a long time. I will usually print a small version, 4x6 copy of a photograph, and I will stick it on my bulletin board in my office and walk past it. Sometimes it takes just a few hours. Sometimes it can be days or weeks or even months before I come up with what I think of as the perfect title. And just because I know the last three slides have been very text heavy and there's a lot of important material here, I do have a handout about this. And if you would like to email me, I will be very happy to share that handout with you. The bottom line is the perfect title takes time, thought, and imagination. You have to match the image style with the title style, whether it's descriptive, aesthetic, or expressive. You need to connect with broad themes and ideas and emotions and stories. You should avoid overused titles and that kind of art babble style of title, which is so annoying, or over-explaining with your title. And keep it simple. Use the fewest possible words and generally the minimum number of adjectives. So I'm going to just now go through very briefly 9 of the exhibition images on the wall in the gallery, not to give them titles, but rather to ask questions. So when you're looking at these images, think about, what is the image content? Is it identifiable? Do you know what it is you're looking at? And what do you feel or think about this picture? What style of picture is this? And would a title help you appreciate it, or would it actually get in your way? Would you rather keep it a mystery? What style of title might be appropriate? And it also serves, if you're discussing the image with the maker, it really helps the maker perceive how viewers are looking at their images. And that can be really, it's great in a critique group when you're doing this, for instance, because you have one idea of what you intend your image to be all about, but viewers so often see it completely differently. And this is turned up in the little booklet that we have with this exhibition, where viewers have suggested titles for the Untitled exhibition pictures. It's amazing to see the variety of perspectives there are on some of these pictures. So I'm going to start with several what I'll call representational images. Here's one from Dean. So what's the physical content of this picture? Well, we have a couple of roads at a junction here. We have some trees, very green, and some buildings. They look like barns. And we have a red mailbox. So what sort of style is this picture? Is it descriptive? Is it showing a typical country road scene in Lunenburg County? He did tell us in the wall card that this comes from Lunenburg County. Or is this an expressive image? Is it a story about coming to a fork in the road? Which direction do you take? Or is it about the unseen future? Because you can't see what's over that hill. You can't see what's around the corner on the right-hand side. You can't even see the buildings that well because they're shrouded by the trees. So is it about an unknowable future? Would you find a title helpful in appreciating this image, or would you rather leave it untitled and think about it for yourself? Here we have the untitled image by Graham. It's a photograph of the Craig Trans, which I didn't know anything about until I saw Graham's photograph, and I looked it up to wonder what this picture is. And I discovered that it is a derelict US Army tugboat that was causing a lot of environmental hazard. It was leaking oil and finally dismantled in 2024. So is this a descriptive image? Is it the image meant to be about this specific boat and its final resting place before it was dismantled? Or is this an expressive picture? Is it a story on the theme of abandonment, perhaps? Or perhaps the theme of environmental irresponsibility? Or is it even an aesthetic picture? Is Graham asking us to look at the colors and the textures of the boat, of the shoreline, of the drippy, obviously fairly wet day? And is there likely to be a big difference between Graham's intent for this image and our interpretation as viewers, especially if we don't know anything about the Craig Trans and its story? In this case, if it's a descriptive image, a title would definitely help, perhaps even a longer caption that tells us the story about the boat. Here we have Terry's picture in the exhibition, which I'm assuming is an old hay feeding bin at the corner of a stall. So here we have another question. Is this a descriptive image? Does it simply show what the old equipment looks like? Is it an expressive image? And if so, what kind of theme could it suggest? Something that's empty. The horse is gone, the hay is gone. It lets us imagine stories. Or is this a purely aesthetic image? Is it all about the colors and the textures in the image? Would a title help? Or would you prefer to keep it a mystery? Here we have Ray's photograph. What is it of? What's the content? Well, it's people and placards. And according to the wall card, it comes from the Save the Arts rally in Halifax in early April. So knowing that, we could think of it perhaps as a documentary image, a descriptive image that documents the rally, but I'm not so sure in this case with this image. What it really caught my attention in this image was the relationship between the out of focus woman in the foreground looking towards the side and that very odd background skull creature on a pole. And that almost the conversation between the two of them. But what's that story about? That's a very mysterious thing. So there's lots of food for thought in this image, or it could be simply seen as a documentary image about the rally. Would a title help you to understand what Ray had in mind with this photograph, or would you prefer to keep it a mystery? Here we have Ed's image, this wonderful kaleidoscopic reflections of glasses with the photographer bang in the middle here. Well, I don't think this is meant to be a descriptive image showing us the glasses with maybe an accidental reflection in the middle. I suspect that's not what Ed had in mind. Is it an aesthetic image? Is it meant simply for us to look at the colors and the smooth reflective textures in this image? Or is it expressive? Is it meant to ask us to think about the relationship between the person and the drinks, or between the photographer and what's being photographed in the background? And if so, what's the story? This is another one of those wonderfully mysterious or perhaps amusing, comical pictures. And I think you'll find if you look at the suggested titles in this in the gallery booklet that there is quite a range of interpretations of this image. And here we have Kim's image, a moving, shadowy person against a very stiff, industrial looking wall. Well, this is not, I suspect, a descriptive image. We're not meant to be looking at this to show us what it looks like. It doesn't make any sense at all. But it could very well be an expressive image, a story. What is the story about? Well, that's entirely up to the viewer. It could be a story about attitude and movement. I mean, this moving person definitely has the head up and is very, very determinedly walking across this scene. But it could also be interpreted as an aesthetic kind of image because we have a juxtaposition of very ordered, organized lines versus a dynamic flow of the moving person. So it could be interpreted as either expressive or aesthetic or both. And the title, I don't know, would it help? Would you appreciate a title, or are you happy to let it stay mysterious? Now we have what's on the surface, a very simple picture by Colin showing three crows, or at least parts of crows, in a stark, empty sky. Is this a descriptive image? Is it intending to show us what a crow looks like? And we, have a title, American Crow, or whatever they're called. Or is this meant to be an expressive image? You can think of allusions and metaphors here. You can think of the crow as a symbol of an omen of evil, perhaps, or perhaps as its sort of intelligent, human-like social nature. And what's the story behind that? Or is it an allusion to something, for instance, The Birds, the Daphne du Maurier novel, the Alfred Hitchcock film? And if so, perhaps a title would give us some idea of what Colin was thinking about when he created the image. Here we have Mary's picture, which is a combination of close-up picture of feathers along with a picture of birds in flight in a cloudy sky. Well, it's clearly not a descriptive image. She's not trying to show us what something looks like. She's encouraging us to think and feel. Very much an expressive image. Seeing birds and feathers as metaphors, perhaps for flight, for freedom, or clipped wings for death. Would a title help in this case? Or do you enjoy playing with the mystery behind this image? And our last image from the collection here today is Ron's of herons, water, lights in multiple versions that he's put together. Well, it's clearly, again, not a descriptive image. In fact, very few of the images, I think, that ViewPoint Gallery members make are descriptive images. That may be overgeneralizing. It is very, very clearly an expressive image, but what is it expressing? What's the theme here? You can see the heron going from watching and standing stock still to suddenly dive bombing into a poor fish. Is it perhaps on the theme of time passing or the style of the hunter? There's a tension between the tranquility and the action of this bird. There's a tension between the light and the dark tones, the warm and the cooler colors. Would a title help, or do you prefer the mystery? So I'd like to finish today's talk by suggesting a rebranding of my presentation. It's not pictures versus words. It's pictures and words. And I hope that my talk today has shown that titles can be valuable. Or even if you don't want to spend time with figuring out appropriate titles, I hope it's at least inspired you to take titles seriously. Above all, don't be careless with titles, because doing so can make them work against you. Do spend time to make them work for you. And that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will talk to you again on another occasion, I have no doubt. Thanks for tuning in.